Hey team, thanks for meeting me today. I apologize for having to video conference you like this, but I'm going to be out of town longer than I thought. However, I have a project I would like your team to work on in my absence. First, as you all know, we've expanded our business to include the sale of POG ovens, so that our fans can experience our famous hot dogs from the comfort of their own home. I'd like your team to come up with some projections for oven sales for the first quarter of 2012. I also have some new ideas for a hybrid income statement I'd like your team to try. Secondly, I strongly believe in expanding the role of our accounting department. I want to demonstrate that you three can do more than just crunch numbers. To demonstrate this, I would like you all to come up with some ideas for using the stadium in the off-season. It just feels like a waste to let the stadium sit idle when there are no games going on. Lastly, as a further initiative to evolve the role of our accounting department, I would like your team to come up with a strategy to implement the C framework I've been telling you about. I feel this is a vital step for the long-run success of our company, and I'm counting on you all. I look forward to meeting with your team upon my return.
Tomorrow's the big day, team. I wanted to touch base with all of y'all before I go in and talk with Mr. Storm tomorrow. We're going to be discussing the financials and going over the high fixed costs of the ovens and discussing our need to increase sales.
That sounds great, Veronica. I'll meet with him at the stadium to go over ideas for the off-season. I think he's going to love our idea of using the field for a variety of local festivals during the weekends.
Fortunately, I've already scheduled a meeting with Mr. Storm tomorrow at the driving range, so I'll go over our plans for the C framework analysis while I'm there. I believe that already having integrated the C framework into our current analysis will really allow him to see how committed we are.
Y'all have done a great job. Good luck tomorrow.
Veronica, how are you?
I'm doing great, Mr. Storm, and yourself?
Doing well. Just been wrapping up a few things from 2011. How are those POG numbers coming along?
Actually, we just finished our assessment for quarter 1 of 2012. I have everything with me if you'd like to take a look.
That's awesome. I expected no less from such a great accounting team. Why don't you go ahead and show me what you've come up with?
Okay, the first thing we did with the POG oven assessment was define the cost behavior and the cost formula of each element in the cost structure. Here are the tables if you'd like to take a look. As you can see, we've defined the cost behaviors for each of the expense items based on the 2008-2011 general ledger data you provided. The first 4 costs are fixed, while the last 3 are variable.
I see that you've included the depreciation increase because of the new trucks. But what about all the new ovens we bought?
Well, the purchase of the new ovens will be considered in addition to inventory on the balance sheet, and will be expensed on the income statement as cost of goods sold when we eventually sell the ovens.
That makes sense. I see you've kept advertising expense flat, as I requested, and that you've increased salaries and insurance 3%. Can you explain how you came up with the cost formulas for the variable costs?
Certainly. The first thing we did was define the cost driver for each variable expense. The graph will make this a little easier to understand. In each graph, we have the total cost on the y-axis and the cost driver on the x-axis. So, for shipping, the cost driver was the number of units sold. This means that shipping expense increases proportionately with the number of units sold. As the graph demonstrates, we calculated that it costs $11 to ship each unit.
Okay, so I can see from the graph that the cost driver for utilities was kilowatt hours, but it doesn't seem to be a straight line like the shipping expense. How do you know that this is the actual cost driver, and what was the cost per kilowatt hour?
The utilities expense data was not perfectly correlated like the shipping data. However, when we performed a linear regression, we found that there was still a 95% correlation. This same linear regression gave us a formula that we were able to use to predict the 2012 cost.
Okay, I think I'm getting a handle on these graphs. So the cost driver for maintenance is also kilowatt hours. But what is the red X on this graph?
The red X represents an outlier from quarter 1 of 2009. We decided to exclude this number from our regression analysis in coming up with our cost formula for 2012.
So now that I have an understanding of how you calculated all of the costs, can you show me the hybrid income statement?
Absolutely. Let's move on.
So I see that we're selling these ovens at almost 3 times what we're paying for them, and this is providing us with $780,000 in gross profit. However, we only end up making $66,000 in operating income.
One of the benefits of the hybrid income statement is that we can separate variable from fixed expenses. As you can see, at 12,000 units sold, our fixed costs represent almost 40% of our sales revenue. Naturally, the more units we sell, the lower this percentage will be, and thus the more profitable we will be.
I see what you mean, but with such high fixed costs, it seems as if we are barely breaking even.
We had the same concern when we initially saw the data, which is why we calculated the break-even point. With current expenses, we would have to sell almost 10,500 ovens just to break even, which is why we suggest implementing a new strategy to increase sales volume.
So what do you recommend we do to increase sales?
Given that our fixed costs are relatively high, we agree with keeping the advertising expense flat for next year. Alternatively, because our variable operating expenses are only about 20% of our revenue, it would be more cost-effective to increase sales commission in order to sell more ovens.
That sounds great to me. So overall, what did your team think of the hybrid income statement?
We found it very useful. The hybrid income statement retains the gross profit figure, which is included in all GAAP income statements, yet it also provides separate variable and fixed costs. This format allows a manager to easily distinguish at a glance where the costs are coming from and how they behave. As you can see, it can also be very useful for planning purposes. In this instance, we realized that we needed to plan to increase sales volume without increasing fixed expenses.
Those are some great points. I'm glad you found the hybrid income statement useful and were able to distinguish some of its key benefits. The team really knocked it out of the park with the financials. But have you come up with anything for the off-season?
Well, speaking of parks, Lauren said she would meet you over the baseball field to go over some ideas we had.
Excellent. I'm going to head there now.
Lauren, how are you?
Good, Mr. Storm.
I'll be up there in a second.
Thanks for meeting me here at the stadium, Mr. Storm.
No problem. I heard your team came up with some great ideas for activities during the off-season.
We did. We originally were thinking of doing a Winter Wonderland theme during the off-season because that has worked for other ballparks in the past. But we wanted to try something a little more unique, and we were thinking of hosting local festivals during the off-season.
I gotta be honest with you, Lauren. I don't know much about festivals. I'm really just in the business of selling hot dogs.
Exactly. We'd like to have some sort of entertainment that will bring in large crowds of people for long periods of time. That way we could offer our usual array of food and beverage. And this keeps with our current strategy of charging low admissions to bring people into the park and then making a majority of our profit off of food and beverage sales.
So what kind of festival were you thinking?
We were thinking a variety of different type of festivals. In fact, we were thinking of having a different theme for each month.
And would we run these festivals every day?
Probably just the weekends, because our main concern is that we wouldn't be able to bring in enough people during the weekdays to justify the cost.
That makes sense. And what kind of themes have you come up with?
We figured we'd start in October with a beer festival to go along with Oktoberfest. Then in November, we could have something more family-oriented, like an arts and craft festival. After all, we want to keep the community as much involved as possible. And lastly, in December, we could have a few holiday-themed events.
That sounds pretty good. Have you come up with anything for January and February?
Definitely. We thought we'd start the New Year's with a series of music festivals that would run through the end of February.
This all sounds very interesting. However, I'm curious to hear your team's concerns with this type of endeavor and if you plan for any contingencies. For example, what would we do in the case of inclement weather?
Basically, we're thinking we could sell monthly passes for each festival. This would solve the weather problem and hopefully garner repeat customers, because the more times they come, the more hot dogs we sell.
This all sounds rather complicated and expensive. Are you sure we can turn a profit?
Actually, we believe that the new hybrid income statement will come in handy for planning the festivals, since it will allow us to break up the various costs. As you know, the fixed costs would be relatively low, as many of the costs of running the stadium would still be incurred if it was not in use. So our primary concern is the variable costs, which we plan on keeping these costs low by only running the festivals during the weekends and hopefully obtaining outside sponsorship.
I'm not sure I understand how we're going to persuade outside companies to sponsor the festivals.
It would be a little different for each festival. For the beer festival, we could contact some national breweries and offer to put up signs and logos around the stadium, or we could even contact some of the local breweries. For the Arts and Crafts Festival, we could contact local artists and offer them the chance to show their wares. In this case, they would pay most of the setup costs.
I see, but that still doesn't explain how we're going to afford a big band every weekend throughout the months of January and February.
First, we feel that having a variety of smaller or local bands would be less expensive and draw more repeat customers than having big name artists. And secondly, we believe that we could partner with some of the local radio stations, and not only would this give us free advertising on the radio, but they likely have a variety of music contacts.
That's interesting. I hadn't considered advertising. What about advertising for the other festivals?
Starting this year, we can put a page in the baseball programs advertising the different festivals and direct fans towards our website to get more information. we'd want to focus on the unique experience of having a festival on the baseball field, as well as having the baseball players come to the festivals to sign autographs and mingle with the fans.
Very impressive. I think your team is at a home run with this idea. I think it's going to be a huge success.
Thank you, sir. Now it's your turn to go hit some balls as Luke is waiting for you at the golf course to talk about the C framework analysis.
Perfect. I'm on my way.
Oh, hey, Mr. Storm. How you doing?
Doing great. Good to see you.
How was your trip?
It was excellent. I actually just got done meeting with the other members of your team.
Well, wonderful. Would you like to go ahead and hit some balls?
Absolutely. I'm really anxious to hear what you've come up with the C framework.
Well, great. Let's get started. So if you don't mind, I'd like to go over each of the different levers individually, as well as talk about some examples of how we've already begun to live it through our current projects.
That sounds great.
Well, as you know, the first lever we looked at was the catalyst lever. And to us, this means that accountants should be at the forefront of introducing change and new ideas in the organization. So for our fans, this means coming up with innovative new ideas, such as festivals in the off-season. But additionally, our customers are internal managers and employees, which is why we came up with some ideas to increase sales and reduce costs for the POG oven segment. And lastly, we consider the community, which is why we stress the importance of community involvement throughout the festivals.
Wonderful. Tell me about the next lever.
Well, as you know, the second CFO lever is that of collaborators. And to us, this means working to integrate all aspects of the business. So for our customers, this means we want to integrate baseball into the festivals as much as possible, which is why we plan on having Meet the Fan Days. Internally, we hope to emphasize the sale of hot dogs throughout the festivities, as well as leverage our existing programs and website to help reduce advertising costs. And again, we plan on involving the community as much as possible.
That sounds excellent. I'm really glad your team has already begun to incorporate the C framework. What else have you guys come up with?
Third is the role of consultants. As independent and objective advisors, we must be unafraid to deliver potentially unsettling or bad news. For this, our primary customer is internal management. So the most recent example of this is the 2012 forecast of the POG oven segment and the associated high fixed costs. Lastly, for the festivals, we feel that having the community involved as much as possible will help keep the costs low, which is a win-win for everyone.
I love it so far. I must warn you though, the fourth lever is the most important to me.
I agree completely, sir. In today's environment, having the accounting team serve as the business conscience is essential. This is one of the reasons we've advocated keeping the cost of the festival relatively low. Our primary goal is to provide a safe and fun environment for current fans, as well as potentially attract some new ones. In the end, our hope is that we can become an even stronger presence in the community, as well as potentially serve as an example for stadiums across the country.
Amazing. Luke, I'm really proud of you and your team. You guys have hit a grand slam with this project.
Thank you, sir.
Hey team, I'm out of town on business again, but I just wanted to thank you all for your hard work on the project. Veronica, your presentation of the financials helped me realize the opportunities we have to expand on the POG oven segment. It's nice to have solid projections for 2012 profitability, and it was great to see the hybrid income statement come to life. Furthermore, increasing POG oven sales volume by raising the sales commission percentage sounds much better than my original idea of simply lowering the sales price. Great job. Lauren, at our discussion at the ballpark, you demonstrated the value your team can bring to the table as strategic advisors, and you know how much I love outside-of-the-box thinking. I was very impressed with your unique festivals idea, and I know it will be a success. Because the incremental expenses will be variable, this strategy comes with little risk and is much better than letting the stadium sit idle during the off-season. And Luke, thanks again for meeting me at the golf course. After hearing your ideas about integrating the C framework, it's clear to me that your team understands the long-term benefits of this approach. I believe this new business partnering model is key to the growth and prosperity of the Pikesville Lightning, and your ideas will go a long way towards achieving our goals. I was especially pleased with the emphasis you placed on community involvement, because without our fans, we wouldn't be here. I'll be in touch with all of you soon so that we can discuss how to implement your team's great ideas. Great job.